Lately on Book Internet, there has been quite the discussion about the impact of booktok on publishing trends. There isn't really a recent conversation sparking this video, but there's probably one coming because it does feel like every 3 to 6 months, there is some kind of massive conversation on booktok about whether or not booktok is ruining reading and ruining the publishing industry. And the big claim that people always make is that booktok doesn't recommend the best books, but even if the books aren't that good, that they get really popular because of TikTok. And so publishers are pushing out more and more books like that, and that the books are getting worse, and this is leaving room for AI slop and yada, yada, yada. It's obvious that I think this is pretty silly. This is a cycle. More often than not, genres that get really popular, and specifically genres that get really popular amongst women, that other people will point at those genres and say, oh my god, look at how bad those books are, look at how stupid those women are for liking to read those books, they're gonna ruin the publishing industry because the publishers are just gonna publish all this slop, and all that you're gonna be able to read in 5 years is slop, because all these women are reading is slop. But the purpose of this video is not just to rehash points I made in a different video I posted like 2 months ago. We're gonna do something significantly more fun today, because I was at a used book fair and I was perusing the paranormal / fantasy romance mass market paperback table, as one does. I'm sitting there at this table looking at these mass market paperback books that were all published in the late 2000s and early 2010s during the Twilight craze, that are these ridiculous slop, just like fun for the sake of being fun, probably not very well written paranormal romance books. And how much this kind of proves my point about this always happens in a cycle. It's usually a genre that mostly women enjoy, and people always point to it and say, that's gonna ruin publishing. Oh my god, everybody's just reading slop these days. All we're gonna be able to read in 5 years is slop. And I thought, you know what? Why don't we go through some of these? Why don't I do a series where we go through slop paranormal and fantasy romance from the late 2000s and early 2010s to maybe really hammer home the point that yes, fantasy romance is really popular right now. Yes, it's popular because of booktok. Yes, because it's the popular genre of the moment. Writers are just trying to write in it, and a lot of what's coming out right now isn't super well written. None of that means the publishing industry is tanking. So today, we will be unpacking Lethal Rider by Larissa Ione. This is not the most ridiculous fantasy romance I've ever read, but I do think it holds the crown for most ridiculous fantasy world. The world building is absolutely insane. We will be spending so much more time unpacking the world building than the plot. I'm obsessed with it. I can't stop thinking about it. It's been dominating my headspace since I finished it. I'm so excited to tell you about it. Buckle up, grab a snack, grab a drink. We are about to have a ton of fun. Let me describe to you the premise of this book. This book centers around one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which, if you're not familiar, is a thing from the Bible. In the book of Revelations, which is describing how the world is eventually going to end, there are these 4 horsemen that bring death and destruction to earth. And one of them is the horseman of death, and he is our main character. His name is Thanatos, which, if you're not familiar, is the Greek god of death. He is the horseman of death, not the god of death. Do not get confused, but his name is Thanatos, which is the Greek god of death. Each of the horsemen in universe have a seal that if that seal breaks, then they become the thing that they are named after, essentially. So in universe, the horseman for pestilence, which I found out isn't actually what the horseman is from the Bible. I didn't even know that. So this book also holds the crown for first fantasy romance to ever make me consult the Bible because of something else that we'll unpack later. But when I was doing that, I was like, wait a minute. And I ended up on this deep dive about the fact that the horsemen of pestilence is kind of made up, and that in the Bible, the horsemen are war, conquest, famine, and death. But anyway, for example, at the time that this book starts, Pestilence broke his seal. So before, he was a guy named Resef, and he was siblings with these other horsemen. But now that his seal has been broken, he is Pestilence. Essentially has no control over himself, or like the old version of him has no control over the new version. And that he is just like truly evil and wants to destroy the earth now. And so he's trying to do that. And that will become important when we do eventually unpack the plot. Thanatos' seal is his virginity. And so as you can imagine, there's a sexy woman he wants to have sex with. But any adult interactions between between them would cause the end of days. Quite the barrier to overcome in a relationship. The first sentence, okay, of the premise says, Thanatos, the most deadly horseman of the apocalypse, has endured thousands of years of celibacy to prevent the end of days. But just one night with the wickedly sexy Aegis guardian, Regan Matthews, shatters centuries of resolve. Yet their passion comes with a price. And that was at the point at the bookstore that I completely stopped reading the premise because I was sold. I was like, yep, we're doing it. And not only are we doing it, we're going to do it for the first book in this series because that's amazing, that's incredible, that's so silly, that's so goofy. Of course they can't have sex because it would bring about the end of days. But that's not actually the premise of this book. So I read the first few chapters and I was really confused because I was like, wait a minute, she's pregnant with his baby. He has not become death. The end of days, in fact, have not come. So how on earth could he have fathered a baby of hers? Apparently this whole background of like a bunch of other interactions that they've had. After reading the first few chapters, I had the feeling that I probably had accidentally picked up the second or third book in a series about this couple. Typically in fantasy romance and paranormal romance series, they're about the individual couples and you don't really have to have read the other books to get the context. And so I didn't originally think it was a problem when I saw other books in the series on the back of the book that I was just reading this one. Then I thought, well, what if these were about this couple? And so I started to consult Google trying to find like the first book about this couple. So this author wrote an entire book series about an underworld demon hospital, and that had kind of kicked off this world building that has led her to write a bunch of books in this universe, in this world with these characters that all interact with each other. And so this is from a series about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Each book is about one of the horsemen. So the first two books are about war and famine, and then this one's about death, and the final one's about pestilence. I don't know when they had any of these interactions. Again, in reading these early chapters and all this stuff that these characters were referencing, these felt like events that the author was referencing that she's assuming me, the reader, has read about. But from what I can tell, these other books are about these other couples. So I'm not sure if at some point in these books about these other couples, we get this side romance between Regan and Thanatos. Regan is the name of the main girl. I honestly can't tell you because I'm not going to pick up a whole book and try to read it just to find out. I will tell you that I was really, really confused. And at that point, I was feeling a little bit cheated because I was sold on the idea that the horsemen of death and some random sexy woman were going to be having this will they, won't they, and if they will they, they'll end the world. And then I flipped to the back again and I read the whole premise and I realized that it does actually say that. So that's my own fault. So the full premise is Thanatos, the most deadly horseman of the apocalypse, has endured thousands of years of celibacy to prevent the end of days. But just one night with the wickedly sexy Aegis guardian, Regan Matthews, shatters centuries of resolve. Yet their passion comes with a price. And Thanatos must face a truth more terrifying than an apocalypse. He's about to become a father. Yeah, if I'd read one more sentence, I would have known that. But I'm honestly happy I didn't, because I'm not sure I would have picked up the book if I had known that, and we're about to have so much fun, you guys. Demon Slayer Regan never imagined herself the maternal type, but with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, she had no choice but to seduce Thanatos and bear his child. Now as the final battle draws closer and his rage at being betrayed is overshadowed by an undeniable passion for the mother of his child, Thanatos has a life-shattering realization. To save the world, he must sacrifice the only thing he's ever wanted, a family. So yeah, she's pregnant the whole entire book. Baby's not born until the end. And prior to the events of this book, you either do or don't see on page an entire first arc of this romance that happens between them, where Regan, for some reason, is like stationed at his house or goes to his house. She's a demon hunter. Have a whole will they, won't they romance already. And it ends very poorly and she ends up pregnant. But I just want to stress that within this book that is allegedly about this romance between these two people, all of these events are referred to very similarly to when you're reading like a book 2 in a fantasy romance series and the author is trying to remind you of certain things that happened in book 1. Like the implication of the way these sentences were worded is that I, the reader, have already read this stuff. I threw a lot of information at you just now. Can you imagine how I felt reading this? And I want to say I understand fully that I did this to myself. And I'm not saying this is the author's fault at all. There wasn't really ever a point where I was like confused about what the world building was. It always made sense. It was always explained to me in the moment. But because it was book 3, there was no in-depth explanation about any of it. It was all like a one-sentence reminder in case you forgot since you read the first one or whatever. So I'm assuming over the course of the first 2 books in this series, a lot of this information is slow-rolled and delivered in a way that doesn't feel so jarring. It led me to wonder, maybe I should just take a step back and start at book 1, but I decided to give it a few more chapters, and I'm so happy that I did, because I actually decided that there's no other way I would rather this world building be delivered. I think it's infinitely funnier with zero backup or context and everything just thrown at you, and you're just like, okay, I guess that's true in this universe too. So without further ado, with all this buildup, let's break down what I understand about the world building in this universe. It takes place in a version of modern day Earth. So there's 3 realms. There's heaven, there's the earth, and there's Sheol. You have angels, you have demons, you have the horsemen of the apocalypse, you have vampires, and of course, because we have vampires, we also have werewolves. So you might be thinking, okay, we're like making the Bible canon and also throwing vampires and werewolves in there. No. That's not the situation. Here's how the religion works in universe, okay? There's all of the human religions. As far as I could tell, they all exist in this universe, but there are demon religions as well. And we are explicitly told in this book that there are equally as many demon religions as there are human religions, but for the purposes of our narrative, there is the Bible and the Demonica, which is like a demon Bible. And in both of these religious texts, there is an apocalypse. Both of these apocalypses mention the 4 horsemen in their story, and both of these stories of the apocalypse are canon. And the horsemen could cause a demon apocalypse, or they could cause a biblical apocalypse. And they have different seals for each, or like different ways that the apocalypse would be triggered for each. But if it's the demon apocalypse, then they're bringing about the death and destruction on earth. And if it's the biblical apocalypse, then they're fighting on the side of good. That's always how it's worded. It's never explained what that means. In a heavenly version of the apocalypse, does that mean they're still causing the death and destruction on earth? They're just doing it on behalf of God, and so it's like on behalf of good? Or does that mean that they're fighting on the side of the humans? It's never explained. We'll never have that resolved. In theory, I could read all like 20 or 30 books that exist in this series now to find out, but I'm not doing that. God is referenced and Satan is referenced, and Satan is like the king of the demons and God is the king of the angels. There's aspects of these things that are canon, but other large aspects that are not. And somehow there are like a bunch of other religions, despite in universe there seeming to be proof that this heavenly religion and this demonic religion are somewhat real. Unclear how real they are. That's just the beginning. So I already talked about Satan, but Satan actually isn't mentioned until towards the end of the book, and he's not really a character in this book at all. Neither is God. Very early into the book, Thanatos runs into somebody that he describes as a fallen angel that was cast out of heaven and cursed to rule over hell and torture the souls there. So if you're familiar with the Bible, you might think, oh, okay, cool, Lucifer. Incorrect. Not Lucifer. Hades. Hades from Greek mythology. He does have blue hair. So we're going for the Disney version, takes the place of Lucifer. Except no, he doesn't, because then like 5 or 10 pages later, we are introduced to the concept of there being a Grim Reaper as a separate character from Hades. Mind you, neither of these people are Satan. The Grim Reaper's name is Azagoth. When I Google the name, I only find this book series. So I'm pretty sure that was a name made up for the book series. But he's the Grim Reaper, and he's actually the one who rules over hell, supposedly, or has a lot of power there, because there's also Satan. And in this book, we're not given any descriptions of who exactly Satan is within this universe. And it is framed out to be that Azagoth is the one who has all the power over Sheol, the underworld hell, if you will. He is also a fallen angel that was cursed to that role. So far we have 2 versions of fallen angels who have some kind of power over hell and are torturing the souls. One of them is Hades, specifically as he appears in Disney's Hercules. The other is Azagoth, the Grim Reaper, and also Satan is there, and he has some sort of impact here. But if you thought that meant that Lucifer wasn't a character, again, Wrong. I have no context for who Lucifer is within this story, but the name is mentioned at random. We do have Satan, we have Lucifer, we have Hades, we have the Grim Reaper, aka Azagoth. Both Hades and the Grim Reaper have the same story of the origin of Lucifer, and that pretty much sums up how hell works. It's also the demon realm / evil human soul realm, and so it does seem that demons are a separate species from humans, specifically because there is a point where there is a baby demon. None of the adult demons that we interact with reference their old human lives, so it doesn't seem like the demons are created out of the evil souls of the humans. Let's talk about the horsemen. So there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They were cursed, so they were not born the horsemen, but they are all 4,500 years old. Getting up there in age, I would say. They are war, famine, pestilence, and death, and their names are Ares, Lemos, Reseph, and Thanatos, respectively. So yeah, the horseman of war is named Ares, which is the Greek god of war, but he is not the god of war. He's the horseman of war. Stay with me. We have Lemos, which I looked it up, and that actually is the name of a Greek god for famine. Also not the god of famine. Horseman of famine. Keep up. Thanatos, horseman of death. Not the god of death. Cannot stress that enough. Reseph, which I cannot tell if it's spelled correctly or not. It's Reseph. The closest that I could find is Resheph, which is a god associated with war and plague. He was an Egyptian god. Now there's layers to this not making sense, and that's what I love so much about it. So we've got 3 Greek god names and 1 Egyptian god name, but do not get confused. These are not the gods of these things. They are the horsemen. This is ridiculous, obviously. Why on earth would you use such recognizable names for gods of these things if these characters were not meant to be gods of these things? And also, why the random Egyptian god pull? No insult to the ancient Egyptian religions, but Ares actually lives in Greece, so I'm not sure if in his book we get an explanation as to why the 3 of them have Greek god names. I'm assuming it's going to be something to the effect of they were who the Greek gods were named after, not the other way around. But if that's the case, then why wouldn't she have used the Greek god for plague instead of Reseph? Again, why would Reseph be different? But I'm not reading his book to find out. So those are the 4 horsemen. You have the Bible, you have the demon Bible. They both have their own version of the story of Revelation. And in the demon version, each of the horsemen have some kind of seal, and when their seal breaks, they lose complete control over themselves, and their ultimate goal is to destroy the earth. And we only know 2 things about the biblical version. One is that in that version, they fight on the side of good, whatever that means, and 2, that their seals can only be broken by their father, who allegedly we spend the entire book wondering if it's Azagoth. We know that their mother is Lilith, but they were cursed to be horsemen. They were not born to be horsemen. Multiple of them reference other siblings that are not each other, but they are all also siblings somehow. For example, at some point it's mentioned that Pestilence had a baby sister. When we're getting some of Thanatos' background, we find out that he had a bunch of siblings when he was growing up. And again, there was like a distinct point where they were cursed to be these horsemen. They were human before that. They became immortal when they were cursed. But somehow all of their mother is Lilith. Cool. So the other name that we're given for their dad is Yenrieth, which I have heard before. I swear I've heard before, but I've been Googling around and I cannot find it anywhere. We're told that Thanatos is trying to nail down who their father is, but he thinks their dad potentially is Azagoth, the Grim Reaper. Thanatos has a tattoo on his arm that he can basically summon his horse to, and when he wants his horse, he summons him out of the tattoo and he becomes a real life horse, and his name is Styx. How on earth the horse could have the name of the river from Greek mythology, I'm not entirely sure, but there you have it. Now, you might be wondering, after all of this that we've unpacked, what about Jesus? How does Jesus play into all this? I'm not entirely sure. The name Jesus and the word Christ are both used as curses the same way that we can sometimes use them. So if you hear somebody who's like frustrated or surprised or something, it goes, oh, Jesus. People do use the word Jesus and the word Christ in the same way in this book. And so I marked that pretty early in because that implies the existence of Jesus. And I was trying to keep track of what from the Bible actually was canon in this universe. Oh, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the horsemen, I got distracted talking about the whole Yenrieth thing. So in the biblical version of the apocalypse, it's their their father who can break their seals and start the apocalypse. Despite the fact that they prevented at the end of this book the demon apocalypse from happening, the biblical apocalypse, the heaven apocalypse, is still potentially on the horizon, and the horsemen could be forced to be a part of that. But they would fight on the side of good, whatever that means. And at some point it did get confirmed for me, because he is referred to explicitly that Jesus was a person that walked this earth at some point in time canonically, but he is not a part of the events of the story, does not seem to be immortal, and he's not mentioned in the same way God is mentioned, as in like they kind of talk loosely about God ruling heaven, although he never comes into play as a character. They never really speak about Jesus in that way. So I have no idea like where Jesus is now or what his role exactly was when he walked the earth in this universe. Pestilence's horse is named Conquest. So this shows that she knows that the actual horsemen are war, conquest, famine, and death. And I don't fault her for using Pestilence instead, because that is the pop culture understanding. That was my understanding. But Pestilence's horse being named Conquest implies that she knows that the actual horseman in the Bible is Conquest, not Pestilence. I just thought that was hilarious. I have two other things to tell you about the world building. The first is just the context behind our main girl, Reagan. She is the super sexy demon hunter. She works for this organization called the Aegis. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is Aegis. And they are this organization of demon hunters, and they are also working right now to prevent the apocalypse. Reagan's father was not a demon, but he was possessed by a demon when she was conceived, which means that some of the demon energy was possessing the swimmers, apparently. And so she has some like weird powers. She has two main powers, although one of them goes away when she gets pregnant and doesn't come back after she gives birth. So I guess now she only has one power. The one that she had before was the whole soul thing, where she can rip other people's souls out and can defend against souls attacking her. And she's also a psychometric empath, which means that I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. This is really serious. It means that when something is written down or art is created in some way, she can touch it and she can feel the emotions of the person who created it that they were feeling when they created it. This feels like one of those powers you would be mad that you got in a world where people have superpowers. I guess the soul ripping thing is a lot cooler, and she does have that as well, but that's the thing that goes away when she gets pregnant. And she's able to hang on to this, like she can put her hand on a piece of art and be like, the artist was feeling really dejected when they painted this. And the author tries so hard to make this power relevant, and I have to applaud the effort. I've read so many books where a character has some kind of superpower or ability that only comes up in like 2 places in the book and is otherwise never spoken about. I have to respect the fact that her ability to do this does come up quite a bit in the plot. I will say, it still doesn't come across as the most useful skill. And yeah, that's Reagan. And now she's pregnant with Thanatos' baby. Oh my god, no, I still need to tell you about the vampires. You guys, I forgot to tell you. Thanatos is also a vampire. He's the horseman of death, not the god of death. He's just named after the Greek god of death, and he's also a vampire. And there's a big reveal in the middle of the book that he actually started the vampire race. So none of the other vampires existed, but when he was cursed to be a horseman, he was turned into a vampire. Apparently all the horsemen went a little crazy right after they got cursed and caused a little bit of death and destruction. And so he had all this bloodlust and he was going around drinking people's blood. And he did not realize that if he didn't drink the blood all the way and the person didn't die, that they ended up becoming a vampire. So those vampires that he made directly are called daywalkers, and they can go out in sunlight. But there are also nightwalkers, and those are vampires that have been turned by one of the daywalkers, and they can't go out in the sunlight. But this is not known information by the world at the start of the book. New species need to get approved. You need to get permission to create a new species. Permission from whom? Well, Azagoth, the Grim Reaper, has the final say as to whether or not you can make a new species. But then even in the conversation he's having with Thanatos at the time, he says that if heaven finds out, they would get mad at Azagoth for not destroying them after he found out they existed because he didn't give permission for them to be created. What is the political relationship between heaven and hell in this universe? And also, where does heaven think the vampires came from? They didn't just notice that this new species just popped up one day. The existence of vampires does not seem to be a secret at all. The secret is that Thanatos created them. And Thanatos believes that if anybody, including his own siblings, found out that he was the one who fathered the vampires, then all of the vampires would have to be destroyed. So where did they think the vampires came from? And we never get an explanation for how the werewolves come into play. We're told they exist and that's it. We never meet one. I'm sure we do in other books. I'm not going to read the series to find out. Now I believe I can finally tell you my favorite thing about the world building. While you're reading this book, all of the characters are either angels, demons, one of the four horsemen, vampires, or humans that are demon slayers. And the experience of reading the book is super focused on the supernatural and paranormal aspect of this world. But it takes place in our modern day world. And the author was not shy about making specific pop culture references. And so I would like to read you a list of things that exist in this universe alongside everything I've just told you about. And I want to see if you can guess what year this book came out in based off of this list. iPods, Jersey Shore, Mountain Dew, Star Trek, and Yahoo. Get a year in your mind. Get a year in your mind. Did you guess 2012? Both the Star Trek one and the Yahoo one, I have to read you the quote because it just sent me. This is in the middle of an incredibly serious conversation between Regan and Thanatos. Regan did something pretty messed up to Thanatos prior to the events of this book. They are in the middle of a conversation about that. And Thanatos says, "So the end justifies the means. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," as Spock would say. As Spock would say? Is that where that came from? I don't think Spock came up with that. I don't think Star Trek invented the concept of utilitarianism. Now for the Yahoo one. Why don't you just put a sign on the building and upload our address to Yahoo? Sorry, upload our address to Yahoo? Guys, I was alive in 2012. I was a freshman in high school. That's not what Yahoo was. Oh my God, they did have Yahoo Maps. And they revived it in 2019 and it immediately went defunct. I stand corrected. Yahoo Maps existed. I guess I wasn't aware of all of the map services that were available at that point in time. It was really, so Google Maps for mobile devices was released in 2006. Then my parents were not early adopters because I am pretty sure they still printed out the maps from MapQuest when I was in middle school. Also, at one point they eat spaghetti. Something about the horsemen of death eating spaghetti. That's the world building. But I keep saying there's some of these unanswered questions that I potentially could get answered if I read the rest of the series. So you might be thinking, if I found so much joy in the world building, why not continue with the series? Why not see what else happens? Why not get some of these questions answered? Who is Jesus in this universe? Why do we have 4 different versions of the devil? At this rate, there's going to be a different character called the devil. Would it shock you to hear that this book's not that good? And it was honestly really disappointing because I hope that you guys can feel the like happy, giddy energy that I've had explaining this. I actually love this so much. I love silly things like this. I think it's so enjoyable. And I would totally be down to read a ton of books in a world as goofy as this and find the answers to all of my questions. But unfortunately, the book is kind of really poorly written in a way that made it somewhat hard for me to read, despite the fact that I was really enjoying all of these reveals I was getting about the world building. That doesn't always correlate. Like, I have read books that have very silly premises like this that are at least well written enough that they're totally readable. And this was readable. I don't mean to imply that it wasn't. Specifically, we're told, not shown, like everything. Obviously, I might be a little bit biased on my interpretation of that because, again, I'm picking up this book just in the middle of all of this. And so I was thrown this world building. You're in the middle of reading and you just get a sentence that's like, Azagoth, the Grim Reaper, the fallen angel that rules hell. And you're like, yeah, cool. But outside of that, even with the characters, there's so many moments where we're told what the characters are feeling in that classic over analyzing their own behavior in their mental train of thought that if you do read a lot of books, you know exactly what I'm talking about and I don't need to explain it anymore. Where it's like, I know that I'm only doing this because I have trauma, but I can't help myself. People don't think like that. Don't put that in somebody's internal monologue. That's not how that works. And also, I'm not stupid. I know she has trauma. I know she has trust issues. I know that that's probably why she doesn't doesn't trust him. I don't need you to explicitly tell me that once a page, because that's the other part about it, is it's not just that that happens, but it's literally every other page maybe that we get at least a paragraph of either Thanatos or Regan having this mental train of thought that's like a therapist's interpretation of their behavior and where it's coming from. And also, they repeat all the time what the issues between them are, why they don't trust each other, why it would be hard for them to have a relationship. It felt like the gag they literally just did about the Oscars, about the new way they're writing movie scripts, because they're planning for people to kind of be on their phone and not be paying the most attention to the movie. The characters are like repeating the important information every 10 minutes. Like, it felt like that, but it was literally at points like every page or every other page that in their head it would be like, yeah, I know I betrayed him, and I know that I'm pregnant with a baby that's just like the evidence of my betrayal, but I didn't mean to do it, but he doesn't know that yet. But I know that that's why he doesn't trust me, and I know that I in turn don't trust him because I don't know how he actually feels about me, but I am feeling really drawn to him in this moment, and I don't really understand that. To prove my point, I am going to open to a random page. I'm going to show you where I only marked a few pages so you can see. No page mark, no page mark. We're opening at random. Okay, we're at the beginning of chapter 26, page 291. Oh my God, and literally the first sentence. I told you I was literally doing this to see how long it would take me to find an example of that, just opening to a literal random page, and it literally is the first sentence of this chapter. Regan had come around. Thank God. Oh, she was still planning to give up their son if they didn't stop pestilence, but by now he knew that it wasn't because she didn't want the baby. He'd seen evidence that she loved the child all along, but now she was less certain that giving their son to Jem and Kai was the right thing to do. All of which information the reader would have known already at this point. Why are you doing this? So much of this book is exactly that. I literally watched this happen. I know that Regan's plan is to give the baby up, which I know we haven't unpacked the plot yet. We'll get to, there's a reason why I'm saving it for last. I know all these things. This is this far into this book. We know that her plan is to give the kid up. We've known that's been a huge plot point the whole book. We know it's not because she doesn't want the baby. We've also seen the evidence that she's loved the child, the same that Thanatos is telling us about it. And we are also seeing the uncertainty within her internal monologue about her decision to do that at this point in time. So why is the first paragraph of this chapter just recapping all of that? Genuinely, every 3 pages, you get like, as seen on last episode, recap. Okay, let's do it again. Let's find a place like earlier in the book, because I feel like it was so much worse earlier. We've got 42 and 43, literally right at the top of 42. Ares, oh my God, we'll talk about this. Ares says to him, Than, what did you do? In his mind, he thinks, nothing much. I threatened to kill the mother of my child and half the Aegis elders. And then he says out loud, it's none of your concern. Again, we have literally just watched him threaten to kill the mother of his child and half the Aegis elders. It basically alternates back and forth between like thing happens and then we get a recap of everything that's happened in the book. And then thing happens and then we get a recap of everything that's happened in the book. And then thing happens and then we get a recap of everything that's happened in the book. And it's literally, it's constant. So that was the biggest thing that made it not so fun a reading experience for me. Some of the other issues that I had, I'm just not really a fan of dubcon, to be honest. I know some people are into it. I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum. It's just not my thing. The other really big thing is that this book was very overtly crass in a way that came across as very forced. To be clear, I have no issue with a book being crass. Obviously, if you've watched any of my videos, the concept of a curse word is not going to send me flying through the window. And also, like, discussions of adult things and jokes about adult things and things like that, like, none of that bothers me. It's not the fact that the stuff was in the book, but it's the way that it was integrated in there. It was just so unnatural. And it felt so much like the author was trying really hard to project, I'm a big bad horseman of death, cool, edgy, not afraid to say the crass thing energy that felt very put on and very forced. Let me read you some examples. So this is from the chapter where we get introduced to Thanatos. This is the first that we're reading his internal monologue. Ever since he'd been cursed as the horseman who would become death when his seal broke, he'd believed that his seal was his virginity. He'd guarded his dick like it was the freaking Hope Diamond. He might have been an unpinned grenade ready to blow with sexual need, but damn it, he'd kept himself all virginal and shit. It just feels like she was trying to give Thanatos this like really edgy internal monologue. Did not land. The entire book in his perspective sounds like that. And not only that, but this is a small gripe I have with the writing. In his own internal monologue, he refers to himself as Than, which is also a nickname that other people call him by, When the nickname is in the dialogue, it's really easy usually to understand that people are referring to Thanatos. If you think about a character in their internal monologue, how often does a sentence start with their own name? Meredith went to the store to get a glass of milk. A glass of milk from the store? Guys, I don't know. I've been filming for like 2.5 hours. But you get what I'm saying. When you've got a character who's narrating the book in the third person, but you're in their perspective, they say their own name over and over again, right? Meredith did this, Meredith did that. And it's so common for the sentences to start with the name. And when the word is at the beginning of the sentence, it's always capitalized. So you don't have the capitalization to tell you if it's the word than or the name Than. I would start to read a sentence, get like 3 words in and be like, wait, what? And then I would be like, oh, it's Than, like they're saying Thanatos, not Than. Why would she do that? Making the character Thanatos' nickname Than makes sense. And again, when the characters are calling him Than in the dialogue, it's always really obvious that that's his name that they're saying, usually just because of the nature of how we use people's names in speech. Hey, Than, look over here. Like, I'm not going to get confused there, you know? Why would she make him call himself Than in his internal monologue? This book is traditionally published. This was published by Hachette, which I found out after uploading my last video. I said wrong. This went through like editors. Nobody had the thought of, hey, that's a word in the English language. And actually the way that it's used in this character's internal monologue and any character's internal monologue in the third person, we're going to have a lot of sentences starting with his name. And so it might get confusing very quickly. Than frowned. Look at that. Is that going to focus? You tell me that the first time you saw that, you wouldn't be confused. Later on the same page, it says Than closed his eyes. Eventually, I assume my brain got used to it because I stopped noticing it, but that was an adjustment period. So the writing obviously wasn't for me. I wasn't a really big fan of it, but this brings us to the biggest disappointment of them all, which is that despite how ridiculous, how silly, how funny, how goofy, how just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks this world building seems to be, the plot was so dull and so predictable. It actually ended up making me a little bit angry, because how could you be so creative and so hilarious to come up with all of this silly ass world building? And so here's where I reveal to you that if I have a book that I want to make a video about, sometimes I have a thought going into reading the book that doesn't really pan out for the video itself. And so it's not what I end up doing for the video. And with this one, I got about 4 or 5 chapters in and had a solid list of all of the silly world building that I'd already been introduced to at that point. I was having a little bit of a library work day with a friend. And so I stopped reading, explained the world building I already knew to my friend, and then we made a bingo card of possibilities of where the story was going. You'll notice baby is a centaur. Baby is the lamb, because there's like a lamb that's important in Revelation. Look at how much fun we had with this. Look at how silly this is. Look at how goofy. This is the experience that I thought I was in for. I thought that I would get at least one of these things correct. And in fact, not 3 pages after I started reading again after we made this, Reagan gets kicked by the baby pretty hard and kind of reacts to it. And Thanatos is like, are you okay? And she's like, oh yeah, I know. It's almost like he has hooves. And I was like, oh my God, you're kidding me. We're right about the baby being a centaur. You're kidding. And I was so excited. But the silliness of the plot did not match the silliness of the world building at all. Reagan is pregnant. But you might be thinking, how does she become pregnant? Why am I so afraid to talk about it? Not consensually, unfortunately. So sorry. So we're not going to unpack that too deeply, because this is supposed to be a fun and lighthearted video. But if you want to skip ahead, I'll put a timestamp on a screen. What we know at the start of the book is that Reagan was sent to seduce Thanatos to bear his child, and that this is a betrayal. That was her intention the whole entire time, but that she did end up, building feelings for him or whatever. We are told that she completely accidentally, but she thought, according to her, that he was consenting. And it's just, I don't know. I didn't like it. It was the only part of this book that was not like goofy, funny, haha to me. I was a little bit off put by it. Not for me as a plot point. So we talked about it. We got it over with. I'm not really going to bring it up again. They all knew that they were betraying Thanatos doing this. And mind you, they all also thought he was going to become death in the midst of all of this, because everybody thought that his virginity was his seal, including himself. But then his seal didn't break. So everybody's super confused. We never get a new seal for him also, but we are eventually told that the baby is his agamortis. It's essentially now a person who is your seal. So if the baby dies, then his seal will be broken. So I filled in that I think that his seal probably was his virginity, but then the baby became his seal when the baby was conceived. I guess his swimmers were just real fast and that embryo implanted like right away. They realize he didn't immediately become death, but they do immobilize him anyway because they're worried that he's going to go on a murderous rampage and kill Regan for betraying him. And safe to assume that he would do that because that was what he was planning on doing. And literally everybody was in on this plot to get this baby from Thanatos and nobody told him about it. I can completely understand why he felt so betrayed. Their explanation as to why they all did it is that they had some information that suggested that they needed a child of one of the horsemen and that the horsemen couldn't be aware of the child and that somehow this worked into a prophecy that was going to help them prevent the apocalypse. And they admit right at the beginning of the book that after doing all of this, they found out that this information was planted by Pestilence because Pestilence seems to know something they don't about this baby and how it would all play out. You immediately as the reader find out that there was no reason for them to do it. It was fake information. Again, that's where I'm like, was there another book where all of this happened that I'm just missing? I could not find there being another book in between the other romances with the other horsemen in this one. So either all of this happened in the background of some other horseman's romance, and so that book just like wasn't about that couple, I guess, because of how much happened with this couple, or this is how this is introduced into the series. But either way, we're just immediately told there was no reason for them to do this except bait and switch. It turns out the baby is the key to stopping the apocalypse. So Pestilence planted what he thought was wrong information, but it turns out the wrong information ended up being correct. So later on, we do find out that the baby is really important. But anyway, Thanatos has no idea that this baby exists, and he has no idea why people are keeping him immobilized. He has no idea what's going on. The hellhound venom that they're using to keep him immobilized wears off at random, and he's able to escape. And he doesn't understand why at first, but we find out later it's because he was starting to sense the baby, and the baby is his agamortis and whatever. That somehow made him able to like break through the hellhound venom and escape. And he does have his vampires kidnap Regan and shows up with a vengeful fury ready to kill her until he finds out she's pregnant with his baby. And he's like, listen, I would kill a woman, but not a pregnant woman. So I'm just going to keep you in the dungeon until you give birth and then I'll kill you. But never fear, because as he goes to leave her in the dungeon, he realizes how cold she must be. And then he's like, oh, I can't really put a pregnant woman in a dungeon, can I? So he does have some morals, but they only go so far because he goes on to decide that she's just going to stay in his bedroom with him. And her punishment for betraying him, instead of being to live in a dungeon until she gives birth and then for him to kill her, is going to be for her to provide him 8 to 8.5 months worth of sexual favors that, per his understanding at this point in time, she does not want to provide him. Now, he never follows through on this threat, but for the beginning of the book, I would say for the first like 20 to 30%, he keeps telling her this. He knows pretty early into all of this that he's not actually gonna do that, but genuinely, canonically, decides to keep leading her to believe. And then there's a little bit more dubcon. Again, not my thing, not personally my thing. There's a prophecy that at the first cry, Pestilence will be vulnerable to a specific weapon. And so they figure out that that means basically that when this baby is born and when they cry for the first time, there will be a small window in which Pestilence is vulnerable and they can kill him. But Pestilence knows that the baby is Death's agamortis. So if he kills the baby, then Thanatos will join him in his quest to have the apocalypse happen, right? So anyway, basically the rest of the plot of this book can be summarized this easily. Pestilence is like 3 steps ahead of them, so Regan's put in some kind of danger, and Thanatos rescues her, and then they have a powwow about how Pestilence is like 3 steps ahead of them, and then they make a new plan of what they're gonna do, but it turns out Pestilence was 3 steps ahead of them, and so Regan's put into some kind of danger, and then Thanatos rescues her, and then they have another powwow. That's the whole book. In between, we get this tension between Thanatos and Regan, and eventually they work out their differences, if you want to use that word. The vampires are consistently betraying Thanatos over and over and over and over and over again, and it takes all of the characters a boneheadedly long amount of time to think, do you think the vampires are like banding together to revolt against Thanatos? They never realized that on their own. They're explicitly told that by one of the vampires at one point. But what that vampire tells them is that there are cells of them that are revolting, and some of them are unhappy, but some of them are loyal to Thanatos. So there still is this question of like who's loyal to him and who isn't after the fact. And you're never going to believe this. His trusted vizier, whoever could have seen this coming. Yeah, it's his right-hand man. It's his right-hand man running the rebellion. And then in the end, they do have a incredibly anticlimactic scene where they do succeed at killing Pestilence while Regan is giving birth, because that's not actually the true climax of the book, which sucks. I'm sorry, but that sucks ass. You spend the whole entire book building up to killing this big bad, and then the killing the big bad just happens. It goes fine, anticlimactic. It's like 3 sentences, and then instead there's like some other big climax. I'm sorry, but that's so lazy. And I understand that it was probably because it was really, really obvious, given the fact that it's a romance and they're gonna end up together again, that they're probably gonna succeed at their whole plan to kill Pestilence. And so that couldn't be the big climax because that would have been really predictable. And we can't have anything in this plot be predictable or repetitive, guys. Of course, the only time we're actually gonna prevent that is the one moment where it probably should be the predictable outcome because you've spent the whole entire book building up to it. But then it's just like, Pestilence is dead, but Regan dies giving birth to the baby. And that in and of itself is not the bait and switch that you might think. That's very heavily foreshadowed. But I will say there was a single moment where something in this book surprised me that wasn't the world building. And it's that if you remember from way back in the video, because I told you like an hour ago, Thanatos is not the god of death. He does not have power over all dead souls, but he does have power over the souls of people that he's killed. In fact, they enter his armor. And also, he has the capacity to create vampires as long as they live through him biting them. So you can probably see where this is going. I did not put it together, but like I said, it is the one place where the book actually surprised me in the plot, and it actually was kind of foreshadowed, and so I will applaud her for that. I will give her flowers for this and this alone. And the silly world building, because obviously I enjoyed that a bunch. Thanatos bites her in an attempt to turn her into a vampire so that she lives forever. But instead, he drinks the very last of her blood that was left in her body, so technically he killed her, not the birth, even if she was gonna die of the birth. So then her soul is trapped in his armor. And we find out that the souls in his armor slowly go insane, and he can release them whenever he wants, and they have crazy bloodlust. And then once they get a kill, then they're sent to Sheol, and they spend eternity in hell. So you do not want to be killed by Thanatos. Does not sound like it's a very good fate. So then Thanatos is freaking out because if he just let her die on her own, then she would have ended up in heaven. But in his attempt to save her life, he accidentally doomed her to an eternity in hell. And again, I will give credit where credit is due. I did not see that coming. It was a really good plot twist that there was set up for, and I appreciated it. So then he decides to go petition Azagoth, the Grim Reaper, because the Grim Reaper has power to move souls. I'll remind you that there's been a subplot this whole entire time that potentially Azagoth is the Horseman's father. His plan is to go ask Azagoth to basically use his power to like move souls between realms, to take Regan's soul out of his armor and move it to heaven. But the angel that's helping him find Azagoth's realm and find him, who apparently is a child of Azagoth's, but she's an angel, and she convinces Thanatos to bring Regan's body. The surface level explanation we get is that it's an emotional plea to Azagoth, that potentially seeing Regan's dead body and seeing Thanatos cradle her will help convince him to help move her soul into heaven. We got one really good, really surprising plot point, and then immediately moved into the single most predictable, like, obviously she's gonna get reincarnated and she's gonna be completely fine and they're gonna be together forever. What, do you think I'm fucking stupid? And then we spend the whole time in Thanatos' head with him being like, oh my god, I'm so sad that she's not gonna be able to watch her baby grow up and she and I can't raise the baby together and I love her so much and I'm gonna miss her so much, but all I can do now is make sure her soul goes to heaven. You're not convincing me, babe. Thanatos walks into Azagoth's office and is like, can you help me with this? And Azagoth's like, right, so I rule over hell. I'm kind of evil. So can you explain to me exactly why I would do this good and nice thing? And Thanatos goes, Because you're my father. And Azagoth goes, no, I'm not. And Thanatos is like, really? And Azagoth says, yeah, I think I would remember having sex with Lilith, man. Trust me, I would remember if we did that. There is no way I'm your dad. And Thanatos is like, okay, I guess he's not my dad. And similarly to the way Pestilence was just killed and it was all fine and there was really no hubbub or pomp and circumstance about it, we have this whole buildup about whether or not Azagoth is their father. And then Thanatos is like, you're gonna do this for me because I'm your kid, right? And you love your child? And Azagoth's just like, nah. And Thanatos is like, okay, I guess he's not our dad. I guess we're still hunting for him. What? Brother. And then the least predictable thing in the world happens, which is that Azagoth does in fact put her soul back into her body in exchange for some things from Thanatos that don't matter at all. He had some tattoos that helped him put the emotions into him of like big things that he'd suffered from. And so Azagoth takes the tattoos, won't tell him why. I'm sure we'll get a reveal later. And by we, I mean the other readers, because I'm not continuing. Azagoth does in fact put her soul back in her body, and not only is she now human again, but he makes her immortal just because that makes it really convenient. Oh, and Thanatos also has to agree not to make any more vampires ever again. And Azagoth explains that this is to give him an explanation. You know what, I'm just gonna read this to you. Oh, there was also like a big betrayal with one of the angels people thought was good. That was really obvious to see coming too. That's the deal. That, and you will promise to never make another Daywalker. When those heavenly assholes come to me and ask why I didn't destroy the vampires, I can say that since I can't destroy you, you could make more Daywalkers even if I took out the entire race, so you promise not to make more, blah blah. It's a good argument, take it or leave it. So anyway, that's what Azagoth asks for in return, and Thanatos agrees to it, and then we get a final chapter from the perspective of an angel named Reaver, which is the setup for the next 2 romances in the series. And I will say, one of them, the premise piques my interest, but I was fooled by that once. So I don't know if that's going to be enough for me to pick up that book. I'm certainly not picking up the other one or any others in this series. Oh, I forgot to even mention that Reagan also has OCD and it's questionable representation at best. And we'll just leave that there and end the video. As I mentioned, the plan is for me to make this a series. I have a ton of books that I can do it with. You know, the stated reason is just to hammer home the point that this cycle has happened before and it's fine and it's not ruining the face of literature as we know it, and everybody needs to leave the booktok girlies alone and just let them read the slop they want to read. Who cares? But as you can tell, it's more just because I think it would be fun. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!